Hello, I'm Hans Lee from Livewire Markets and welcome to the property edition of Signal or Noise. That's right, anything to do with Australian house prices, the data or the people that make up the conversation are all up for discussion today. Let's introduce our panel. That's Stephen Koukoulas over on the far end, MD of Market Economics. Nerida Conisbee over here, Chief Economist at Ray White. And of course she's here, Diana Messenius, Senior Economist at AMP and our series regular. A warm welcome to you all. Stephen Nerida, first time on the show. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Topic one. I suspect this is the topic that everyone wants us to talk about, so we'll just get right to it. Could we see a bottom for house prices next year? Now, recent data from CoreLogic suggests that 4 out of every 5 housing markets in this country are now declining. And it's also now been 6 straight months worth of house price declines at the national level. But there are some who argue or believe that the bottom for Australian house prices could come next year, possibly as soon as the first half of next year. Deanna, what do you make of people who say that? Signal or noise?
Well, I would probably say noise for now. I think the bottom in house prices will begin, or home prices generally, will begin when the RBA stops hiking rates. That's usually the historical experience. When we see the bottom in interest rates, that's when we see the peak in interest rates, that's when we usually start to see house prices recover for this cycle. And I think the same thing will start to happen. We have a pretty consensus view. We think home prices will decline by 15 to 20% peak to trough, which I think is where the majority of commentators are sitting. I mean, we could ask the other panelists here. But that would be one of the steepest declines in history for the Australian housing market.
Steve, same question to you, Signal or noise?
Yeah, no, I think we're going to see the bottoming coming pretty soon, perhaps the first quarter, the first half of next year. And the reasons are linked to what Diana was saying in terms of the end of the rate hiking cycle, which I think is pretty soon. I think the RBA is very worried about the economic outlook for 2023 internationally, so they're probably going to be pausing soon. And I look at some of the other key fundamentals, not just interest rates, which I think people really overemphasise when it comes to their discussion on house prices, because demographics are very important. We saw in the budget just recently, immigration's coming back at a great rate of knots, and they're skilled migrants. What do skilled migrants do? They get a job that pays well and they can sort of tap into the market. So I see the bottoming in house prices coming relatively soon, perhaps the first quarter of next year.
So I'm taking that's a signal.
Yep.
There you go. Nerida, I mean, one thing I found certainly interesting in researching for this show, you know where there is a rise, folks? In distressed housing purchases. And maybe, I don't know whether that says that people cannot afford to wait for the bottom, you know, whether it comes or not, but what do you think about that particular debate? Signal or noise?
Look, talking about distressed sales, we haven't really seen a big pickup in mortgagee sales. So we've been tracking regularly the number of mortgagee sales listed on Domain and realestate.com, and it's been pretty flat, and you know, I guess not surprising, we're pretty early in terms of the downturn. Where I think we'll see weakness will be holiday home markets, and the reason being people are travelling again. They've purchased a holiday home because they could, you know, only travel quite locally. They may not be using it that much. The Airbnb market's getting quite tricky. We're in Dunsborough in WA. They've now put curfew on Airbnb residents. They're now banning holiday homes in certain suburbs. So I think there's a range of factors where that will lead to that situation. But then coming back to what Diana and Stephen were saying, that you know, we do have population growth. We've got very high construction costs. We're going to have a housing supply shortage. It's really showing up in rents at the moment. At some point, it will balance out with the cost of finance increasing.
Right. So on the general then scheme of things, would you say signal or noise?
I think signal at this point, yeah.
Okay.
I think the other thing I wanted to add was we haven't really seen the cumulative impacts yet of the rate hikes. I think that a lot of the pain is yet to come for households. I mean, in this week's consumer sentiment figures from Westpac Melbourne Institute, 40% of people are saying that they're going to cut down on their Christmas spending, which is much more than usual. I think people know that the pain is coming. The sentiment indicators at their worst levels in history or at recessionary-like levels, but we haven't seen the fixed rate cliff come, which I think it is coming. I mean, I'm one of those people who's going to feel those impacts next year, but all these things will start to weaken spending more next year. And even if we do see the RBA hit the peak in the cash rate soon, these other issues of weakness in consumer spending will flow through into home prices, I think.
Let me post you all an additional quote, if I can, and we'll put this up on the screen for you. It's from Wayne Byres, who of course is just left as the chair of APRA. Here's the line. From a narrow financial stability perspective, lower house prices facilitating lower debt levels would be no bad thing. So I guess specifically the question I'd like to pose to you all on the panel, is that buyer's way of saying that maybe a fall in house prices is long overdue? Deanna, maybe I'll start with you.
In some ways, yes, because it helps affordability for people who can't get into the market. And that's clearly a problem still in Australia, especially in Sydney and Melbourne, where a very large chunk of the population lives. So we do have an affordability problem in Australia. Lower house prices would be better in some capital cities. But really it's around, is there lending that's going on to unsustainable areas? I'd say that there might be a little bit of high debt to income lending that's looking a little bit frothy at the moment because home prices have gone up so much in the last two to 3 years. So yes, some pullback is necessary, but at the same time, I think that most people in Australia are long the housing market. They don't want to see a large fall in home prices. Everyone feels more negative when home prices fall. There is such a thing as the wealth effect. So for households in general who hold money in shares or in superannuation that's then related to housing, I don't think the majority of households want to see a fall in home prices.
Steve, I can see you nodding away.
Yeah, and I was just going to touch on that wealth effect because it is a very powerful one. The RBA and many other people have done a lot of studies on the wealth effect and its impact on confidence and also household consumption, economic growth, jobs. And house prices, they're sort of expensive. Affordability's sort of an issue, but having said that, Australian consumers are pretty smart. We do have the highest level of debt to income, one of the highest debt to income ratios in the world. But have a look at the asset side. The assets of superannuation and housing are booming. We've never had net wealth at a higher level. So I've got the RBA chart pack. There's a lovely chart in there that does show how the net wealth effect has increased massively. But be careful what you wish for in terms of improved affordability. If we were to see, a 20% fall in house prices and they stay down for a couple of years, so that, say in 2025 house prices are 20% lower than they are today, for example, I think the economy would be in real trouble.
Nerida, what do you think?
Yeah, we do have an affordability problem in Australia. Demographia do a report every year looking at the least affordable countries in the world, and Australia comes in second or third. So at the moment, Sydney's number 3, coming after Hong Kong and Auckland. I think ultimately, I don't think anyone thinks house prices should be as high as they are. We do have huge problems with first home buyers getting into the market. We do have really big problems with the rental market. And then when you look at even people trying to upgrade now, it's really hard for families to upgrade into bigger homes because a lot of the housing stock is kind of stuck with older people.
I'm glad you mentioned rents, and you all mentioned rents. Surprise, topic 2 is about rents. Now, a recent Market Insight report from PropTrack, who of course is owned by REA Group, this is amazing to me. It found that just 19% of all the properties listed for rent on realestate.com.au are going for under $400 a week. Less than a fifth nationally. That is a record low, and it's well below the pre-pandemic figure of 42%. So, Steve, we'll go to you first on this one. Does Australia have a rental crisis, signal or noise?
Yeah, no, it's a real signal. We do have a rental problem, that it is hard to get into the rental market right now with rents increasing at generally double-digit rates. While wages are going up, they're only going up at 3.5%-ish, if that. And so, of course, that makes your affordability from the rental side squeezed, harder, more difficult to do. And it's one of those questions too where I think that the problem is at the lower end of the market. Same with prices, same with rental yields, rental prices as well. So it's why there's the discussion at the government level about improving social housing for the most vulnerable people. So that includes people on pensions or women fleeing domestic violence, that they need houses to live in. That's really, really important, absolutely fundamental. So I'm thrilled to see that they're going to be building a number of those sorts of properties, but it's more than that. We need 5 years, 10 years, where we build a lot of houses. Either the government sector's got to do it, the super funds are looking at it with mixed emotions, and certainly the private sector's got to step up and build a lot of places too.
We'll come back to the politics particularly. Nerida, rent in the 5 major capital cities is up something like 24% year on year. Signal or noise?
Yeah, it's a signal. It's advertised rent, so it's going to flow through to existing rents, and that will flow through to CPI. So that's certainly happening. In terms of rental stress, there are twice as many households under rental stress than there are under mortgage stress, and we know that through the census. They are tracking now the proportion of income being spent on either rent or on mortgages, and that was recorded quite recently. So there's absolutely a problem. Again, it's really challenging. You know, I think on one hand, you know, a lot of people blame the landlords, but you know, the landlords are, you know, it's an investment for them, and you know, there's a lot of complications in Australia because almost all rental housing is provided by mum and dad investors. It then flows through to what Stephen was speaking about, build to rent. You know, that is a big growth area. We know super funds do want to chuck a lot of money into that. We also know that offshore money is quite keen because it's the biggest property asset class in the US and it's quite profitable.
Deanna, the national vacancy rate for rentals is under 1%. Signal or noise?
It's a signal, but I might call it a short-term signal. Obviously, the market is extremely tight at the moment. We've spoken about the vacancy rates being sub 1%. Across the regional areas, that it's obviously not as tight, but it's still much tighter than where it was a few years ago, and rental prices are going up. But when we look at how much we're building compared to what the population flows are, it's kind of even at the moment. And actually over the past 2 years, I mean, we didn't have any migration over the past year, so I guess that's not going to continue. But the migration numbers will start coming back. But we've been building a lot over the past 2 years and the migration has been extremely low. So that's been positive for the supply of homes recently. And if we look at how building approvals are tracking now, they're still running at extremely strong levels. So I would say that we are building enough at the moment. We're building about 200,000 new homes a year, which is enough to sustain the increase in migration and then also natural increase. So I say that the tightness in the rental market will pass, and potentially now that we have this big correction in home prices going on, that could provide an opportunity for some investors who are seeing the 10% drop in prices and potentially the 20% drop if we're correct on our forecast and get back into the market.
What are some of the other policy options we can use to try to fix this? And I say this full well knowing that it's the end of 2022. It was also this year when the coalition was thinking dipping into superannuation to buy a house was a genuine policy option or something they were genuinely proposing. What are some of the other policy options that we can use to try to fix this, apart from the private sector maybe stepping in? Maybe Steve, we'll start with you.
It's a difficult one because the simple solution, going back to Economics 101, more supply, given demand, we sort of know what demand's going to be given the immigration intake. We build a few more than needed for underlying demand, that caps prices. However, and this is the big however, who does it? Is it the private sector? Is it the government sector? Is it the super funds? My dilemma when I sort of try to answer this question is we need to build more houses, but that is a difficult thing to work out. Who does it, how it's done, and where they're built. I think someone touched on earlier, I can't remember, apologies, about NIMBYism. You know, we've got to build them where people want to live. There's no point building the suburban sprawl going further and further away, where the transport's not good, where the schools aren't great, where there's no jobs for people. They've got to be built in areas where people want to live.
Yep. Nerida?
Yeah, I mean, it's housing supply. I mean, people that argue against it, only have to look at somewhere that's, quite tightly constrained. And, I'll give you Byron Bay as a good example. That, people want to be there. It's very expensive now, but at the same time, that economy does rely on tourism to grow. So that, that area is really struggling, and they don't want high density. So it's kind of like, well, you've just got a problem here because you're not going to be able to afford to have key workers in your area if you don't improve your housing supply. And it's hard. Again, it's easier as a government to throw money at first home buyers and give them some cash or give them a stamp duty reduction. To try and talk to Mosman residents about knocking down 5 mansions and building 1,000 apartments, that is a really hard conversation, and that's extreme. I'm just being a bit facetious there, but this is the issue, that people don't want really high densities in their backyards, and they don't want it because it affects amenity. They don't have the infrastructure, doesn't have enough spending put on it. We have schools that can't cope with lots of additional students. Traffic becomes a problem, parking becomes a problem, but then the alternative is to build on the fringe, and then again expensive because it's really hard to service these areas. The other challenge too is potential land banking. So you've got places around Australia where developers do have land, but you know, they own the land and they're quite keen to keep price. You know, and maybe it's definitely not all developers, but you know, we also have a problem at that point, and that's the issue that town planners will often say. So they're like, well, we've released the land, we've zoned the land, we know the infrastructure can get there, but you know, this is the next stage of the challenge, is trying to get the developers
And
to
where do you draw the line, right, between, you know, if you're an investor watching this and you look at this and you think, well, you know, I want to see the value of my property go up, but you know, we have all these other challenges that we could solve. But as you say, if the developers are hogging the land, there's a finite resource as well. I can also hear my old teacher in my head saying, the right thing is not always the easy thing.
No.
Deanna, have you got a thought on this?
I guess people want to live in the capital cities. I mean, if you look at the population figures, 50% of Australia's population live in 3 capital cities. And the issue is that, as the other panelists were saying, the infrastructure on the fringes of, you know, around the CBD, the transport isn't as good, the facilities aren't as accessible to families. And that might be the issue. People don't want to live far away from the CBD because they know that they have to commute there. And I think that, well, this probably goes to the next point as well. A lot of people moved out of the CBD during COVID. Now they're moving back into the CBD because they've realised, actually, I have to come back to the office 2 or 3 days a week, and now I can't live 50 kilometres away from work. And this is a problem. I think that the infrastructure outside of the CBD needs to be better to allow people to get into work quicker and faster. But that goes back to transport and those transport projects.
That was a perfect segue into my next topic.
It's like I knew what you were going to ask.
I know, it's like you knew what I was going to ask, because topic number 3 is the inverse sea change, or what some people sometimes call the reverse migration. So we're going to start this one with a chart, and let's put that up if you would. Now, this is the vacancy rate for house sales in Coffs Harbour. Speaking of Byron Bay, here's Coffs Harbour on the New South Wales mid-north coast. Now, it doesn't necessarily matter whether it's Coffs specifically or not, but it's the rise in vacancy rates in the far right hand of that chart that's really most interesting to us, because that's due to a phenomenon that some are calling the reverse migration. Deanna's just alluded to it. The idea that people moved away from cities during the pandemic and now they have to come back. But is that change also making an already difficult property environment even worse? Narrod, I might start with you on this one, signal or noise.
It's a signal. What happened during the pandemic is we did have the greatest movement to regional Australia ever recorded. So, you know, that was partly because people didn't move into the city, but it was also because people moved out. But the other thing too, which is quite interesting, is looking prior to COVID and what was happening with the move to regional Australia. And we had places like Geelong, Wollongong, Central Coast, not technically regional, but you know, Central Coast was one, Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast. We already were having a lot of people moving to those areas. So it probably was driven a little bit by the fact that the way people were working was changing. But also because those areas do offer affordability, and particularly Geelong, you know, it's only an hour out of Melbourne. It's pretty quick to get back in. Wollongong, you know, you could be in Western Sydney or Wollongong, you've got a very similar commute time. So there was this change happening. And the other change too has been mining. You know, a lot of mining towns required more employment, so those areas really shot up in terms of value. And then agriculture just really took off last year with particularly wheat and cattle did really well. So there's a lot happening in regional Australia, and you know, definitely a change. But this move to regional Australia, I think, is permanent for many people.
The Kimberley during the mining boom, and you know, Geelong and Wollongong. Hello to everybody watching in those areas. Deanna, same question. You signal or noise?
A bit of a noise to me. It's probably going to be a temporary people realising that they need to be closer to the city to go back to work. I still think that the regions will do better compared to, in terms of home prices, that regional home prices will do better compared to the capital cities in this down segment. Also, the capital cities, of course, went up more, so they have further to fall.
Yeah. Steve?
I think it's a bit of noise. The transactions cost, the thing that sort of strikes me about this thing, you know, in a couple of years, buying and selling, you know, the transaction costs are really high. And even if you do make a nice gain on the ticket price, on the sale price of your house, you know, the stamp duty and the other things are hellishly expensive. So to me, I suspect, I'm wondering whether people who are lucky enough or rich enough to have a couple of properties will just leave that one as their holiday house and move back to their main dwelling, if we can call it that, in the main cities. So hard to say, but again, yes, as the economy and people are living with the COVID sort of situation right now, CBD office space is sort of rocketing back, people are coming back to the cities, as everyone is saying. Yeah, I think people want to live close to where they have to turn up to work at least a few days a week. Yep.
Thank you, everybody. Terrific conversation. Let's move now to our final segment. It's our Charts to Watch segment. We have asked all our guests to bring in one, shock horror, property-inspired chart to whet your appetites. Deanna, I'm going to start with you. We were referring earlier to the rental crisis in our cities. You brought along a chart that's got that theme in mind, but you've also linked it to inflation. So talk us through this one.
Yeah, so we've already spoken about this chart, I guess, in the chat, but it's just meant to highlight that the advertised rents for houses and units are running much stronger than the CPI rents. And don't forget that the CPI rents might include agreements that were done a few years ago if you're lucky enough to have a multi-year agreement. So it's showing that with those newly advertised rents running at double digits, around between 10 and 15% on an annual basis, those CPI rents will have to increase from their current pace of about 3% per annum, which will add to services inflation. And services inflation is the one that's really sticky and hard to get down. And that will be the problem for the RBA next year. Goods inflation will probably, well, in our view, it could fall quite quickly in the near term. We might actually see a surprise on the downside for global goods inflation, especially in the US, which has kind of been leading the charge for the rest of the world. But services inflation, which will be driven by things like rents, wages, will be much harder to get down next year.
And actually, that is the one body and the one person we actually haven't mentioned yet in this whole discussion, Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe. And I think that chart summed up beautifully the time lag, right? They always wait for evidence. They always wait for a trend. Well, how can you wait for a trend if it's going to take this long and take all this time to feed through? Lovely, thank you very much. Steve, you've kind of slightly bent the rules here. We've done a table.
Sorry.
We've done a table here for Steve, and speaking of Governor Lowe, you've done house prices following the last interest rate rise in the last few cycles. Why is this table so important to you?
It's a table, apologies, but I spent a lot of time on it, so I want to use it. The table shows what happens to house prices 1 year, 2 years, and 5 years after the last hike in the cycle. Now, we probably haven't had the last hike in this cycle. We may, but we probably haven't. So let's just, for argument's sake, assume that the RBA hikes through to March next year, and then they stop and then they pause. What this table shows is that 1 year after the last hike, so by definition the peak in the cash rate in the 94 tightening cycle, the 99-2000 cycle, the 2010 cycle, and one other one I've forgotten, it shows that 1 year after the last hike, house prices are down about 4 or 5% in a couple of those examples. One of them they're about flat and one of them they're up a little bit. I'll go to the 5 year column. 5 years after, and of course by then there's rate cuts and there's a whole lot of other things happen, but so this is why I don't panic about house prices dropping right now. That's the bottom line of this chart. So if you're buying now, don't worry about it, because in 5 years' time, if history is any guide, at the end of each rate hiking cycle, house prices are up 25 or 30% on average. One example, they're up 60%. But in 5 years' time, so in what are we going to be, 2028, when you look back and think, God, 2022, those rate hikes, I remember how bad they were, but I'm laughing now because my house has gone up 25%.
There you go. Brilliant, thank you very much. Nerida, you've done Sydney house prices and the fall over this year. What about this chart and why'd you bring it along?
I guess three things. The first one being that the growth couldn't have continued because we would have hit over 2 mil by the end of next year for a median, which is clearly a big problem here in Australia in terms of debt levels, affordability. I could go on as to the major problems that would emerge. Secondly, that at this point, prices have come back, but they certainly are nowhere near where they were at the start of the pandemic. So it has a long way to fall to get us back to that level, and it is highly unlikely we'll get to that level. And then going back to Stephen's point around long term, you can see there from that chart that Sydney house prices drop, they don't grow year on year, in a very regular fashion. They shoot up, they come back, they shoot up. But long term, if you had bought in Sydney 10 years ago, you would have done incredibly well. If you'd bought at the absolute peak of the global financial crisis, just before prices plummeted 17%, you would have done incredibly well. So, you know, property is a long-term hold. It's not something that should be traded. It shouldn't be traded because speculation in property markets creates a lot of problems, and we don't want those problems. But holding property long-term, even if you buy at the absolute peak, it is highly unlikely. And even in, you know, my own experience, every time I've bought a property, I've gone, oh, I've been so ripped off, and, you know, felt so like underwhelmed with myself. And then 3 years later, I'm like, gee, I'm smart. That was the best decision I ever made. So, you know, I think it's pretty, you know, it's a pretty familiar feeling for a lot of people.
Nerita's words, not mine. This has been one terrific conversation. Can we just say a big thank you? Stephen Koukoulas of Market Economics, thank you very much. Nerita Conisbee, lovely to have you from Ray White. And Deanna Messina of AMP, always thank you very much. That's it. That's our property show. We're done for another month. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel and the website livewiremarkets.com. We will be back in a month's time with our last show in the present series, where we're going to be taking a look at what has been a remarkable might even be an understatement, a remarkable year for central banks and for economics, and look forward to the year ahead. Until then, thank you for watching.